Everyone. So this is kind of my first official video for the declin. I'm hoping to make some more if people find this helpful. But what I thought would be the first good step, since it's quite topical at the moment, is to talk a little bit about the application process for the clinical doctorate. Now, there's so many great videos and resources out there already. Of course, the UK Clinical Psychology Applicants group on Facebook, Twitter, videos from those like Miranda, the Worry People, offer a real great range of resources already, and I highly recommend checking all of those out. But I thought I could maybe in making this video share a few other little things that helped me and hopefully will help you as well. So let's get started. I think kind of going with the first question, so an important one. For many people, this will be their first time, and also a case of, well, should I even apply? And in answering this question, there's no real right or wrong way to go about it. It really just depends on yourself in terms of, do you feel ready to apply? Do you meet the minimum requirements for the courses you're considering, which we'll come on to a little later on? And if so, do you feel prepared to pay the fee, which £30 or £40 after the early bird? And equally, are you prepared to put up with the stress, the anxiety of the process? The first time I applied under the guise that I'll just see how it goes. I won't be committed. It's just to test the waters. And that ended up being the biggest mistake of my life. It was stressful. And many people I've spoken to report similar things because I don't think you can't not get committed to the process. It's a really long process starting from early September, well, depending on how far you get, but all the way until end of January. If you're shortlisted, even longer. And with social media, you're constantly seeing people talk about it, report their progress, report their anxiety. You can't help but get sucked in. So, with that in mind, I don't know how reasonable it is to assume that anyone can apply for this without feeling stressed, without feeling part of the process, nervous, anxious, and disappointed if they don't get any further. So, what I would say to people on that is if you're prepared to deal with that and you're happy to pay the fee, you're happy to go through that stress, you know which courses you want to go to, you think you meet the minimum requirements, then absolutely try it out. Now, going on to number two, which is which universities should I apply to? And Miranda's video, The Worry People, talked a little bit about this, the importance of researching, checking the background, and yeah, absolutely. Ethos values, very important. And your choice for which course you apply to depends on how important these factors are for you. One being location, two being the values and ethos, three being any opportunities those courses offer. Now, when I picked the courses, location was not at all an important factor for me. Actually, the values and ethos were. And on top of that, point four actually, which I forgot, is the course requirements, in terms of, do I meet the requirements? Are there any pre-selection tests? That's the other point. So for me, that was the most important point, followed by the course's ethos and values. Now, I made an Excel sheet last year that helped kind of highlight some of these things, the requirements, models of therapy you learn, any extra opportunities, to help make it a bit easier. Clearinghouse are updating their website. As of this video, we don't know what it looks like, but supposedly it's going to be a bit easier to summarize that information. So fingers crossed. But up until now, getting this sort of information in terms of the values and ethos has been a lot trickier. You have the clearinghouse, you have the alternative handbook. Some courses do open days, which you can attend. I think there's three with King's, UEA, and another one who I can't remember. They're doing it, but look on Eventbrite. And speaking to other trainees, Now, I did all of those and I picked the courses I applied to. This year, the year I got on, I got 3 interviews out of the 4. And I think applying to the courses that I felt matched my strengths really helped with that. And many people I speak to report similar things, that it is about that match. But what's interesting is that none of the information I read or heard from others seemed to actually match up with my experience of the interviews, for better or worse. I'm not really going to go into that detail, but it really seems to vary. And taking this away, taking away my experience, I never really got I never really understood the ethos values of a course until the interview. That actually revealed a lot. So I do think no matter how much you can prepare, I don't know if you can ever fully know until you've maybe tried applying. Because just because despite what the course's ethos might be, you're still being interviewed by individuals, your application is still being screened by individuals with their own biases, faults. So you have to take that into account, but equally the competition um, as well. Who else is applying? Sometimes you won't get a spot, not because you couldn't, and perhaps in other years you would have been offered a spot, but because there was a lot of competition that year. So when it comes to kind of picking your universities, you do have to consider, do I meet the requirements? Am I happy to do the pre-selection tests, location, values and ethos, and the opportunities, i.e., do I want to go through a BABCP level 2 routes, and work out for you which one's the priority, and then try picking from there. Talking to people, open day, that can help, but do just bear in mind, I don't think it will provide all the information and it might surprise you. So let's kind of going on to the main topic of this video, the application itself. How do we approach this? And I think when it comes to looking at the application, first most important step is look at the application as a whole. I think we can get very caught up in looking at these individual questions and kind of separating it out. But actually, when they're reading it, they're looking at the whole thing, and you can use that to your advantage in a sense. So if we think about the first things you do in your application, that's going to be your experiences. And a common mistake people make on their application is in that first question, in what way have your experiences prepared you for training? I see a lot, and I was guilty of this with my first application. I I see a lot of people being very descriptive, going through explaining what they're doing, what they've done, i.e., in my time as an assistant psychologist working in the inpatients ward, I did assessments, I ran groups. Great, fine, but that's not actually answering the question. And actually, they've got that information in the first question, with experiences, sorry. They've got that info. They can already see you were an assistant psychologist in inpatients, you've done groups, you've done assessments. What they want to focus on in those questions is something different, which I'm going to come on to. But looking at that, you've got the first question, and with that, and how that is very different to the experiences. So, first of all, outline your experiences. That will tell them exactly what you've done. Then goes on to the actual main question. So, let's look at it. In what way have your experiences prepared you? And this was a question that I myself, and I've seen in others, kind of get, kind of don't get. And the mistake, as I mentioned earlier, is getting too descriptive with it. So, what is the question actually asking? Well, it's a reflective question. It's asking you to reflect on your experiences and on your learning. And as soon as you kind of start applying it in that way, your answer becomes quite different. So, what do I mean by this? Well, I'm a CBT therapist, and I talked about that on my application. But actually, in that first question, I never referenced the fact that I was a CBT therapist because I already knew I was. Actually, the things I focused on was what I've learned from being a CBT therapist, and that is the clinical aspect of it. So I'm going to approach this from talking about the clinical. So working as a clinician, doing formulating with my clients taught me XYZ as a very brief example. You don't if you're spending a lot of words building up to the reflective part, don't bother. Just get straight into it. Point of reflection. And actually, unless it's necessary, because you need them to understand, you can actually approach this question just purely reflective. You never have to clarify or specify a specific job role or experience. I never did in my application. I very much took the approach of working with clients in this way. Supervising taught me this. Working on a research trial taught me this. That's how I went about it. So that's the first question in a nutshell. Looking at that second question then, which is around dissemination publication. First of all, Miranda's video also says this, you do not need a publication to answer this question. And I don't have any. I don't have a master's. I've only got my undergraduate and my postgraduate in PWP and high intensity CBT. I don't have any other further academic qualifications at this point. So I also don't have any publications. And when it comes down to that, it says publication slash dissemination. And what do we mean by dissemination? We're talking about sharing information widely. And this is something 99% of you would have done. That would mean sharing an audit you've done, poster, meeting, reports, anything you would have done at work and sharing that widely with the team, clients, stakeholders, whatever. That's dissemination. And when approaching that question, I think it's really important to try and focus on that dissemination aspect. Again, don't waste too many words explaining what you did. So, for example, on my application, I talked about the dissemination where I audited a workshop in my service regarding its recovery rates and attendance rates, satisfaction rates. And initially, I approached that by explaining what the audit was. But then I reread it and realised actually that's not what they're asking. So I changed it where I offered a very brief explanation in one sentence. When I audited the services group recovery and attendance rates, I disseminated it in this way. So I disseminated it amongst the senior team in a team meeting. I disseminated it lectures. I disseminated it amongst other services. I wrote a report and shared it across the whole service. Things like that. That's the aspect that we're looking for. If you have the word space, something I was recommended was to talk a little bit about end it on the implications of that. So what came about from your dissemination, that can be good. Equally, if you've got publications, you're fortunate enough to have it, then the link to it is more than enough as well. And that again is just a testament to that's what they want to see. They just want to see how you disseminated it. If you've got a link to it, then that's already telling them how it's been disseminated. So that's that question. The next question, a really interested one, which is what you hope to gain from training. And there's so many ways you can go about this, and there's no real right or wrong. So if you can hear that, there's a bird chirping away. We've got parakeets, wild parakeets nearby. Okay, stopped. So in terms of approaching that question, the only thing that I think really matters is actually asking yourself, why do you want to be a clinical psychologist? And in all honesty, this was a question I really struggled to answer up until this year. And I'm in a bit of a unique position. It's the bird again. Gonna just ignore it. I'm in a bit of a unique position in that I'm a CBT therapist. I'm already on band 7. I've got a career. I'm stable in that career. I quite enjoy what I do. So I don't need to do the clinical doctorate for the same reasons. In fact, me doing the doctorate is going to bring me down to a pay, bring me back down to band 6 for 3 years. So there's a bit of a disadvantage there. But I'm glad I was in that position because it finally forced me to reflect on why I want to do the clinical doctorate. And it's asking ourselves this tough question: why the doctorate and nothing else? Initially, I said to myself, well, I want to learn more than CBT. Well, fine. Why don't I just do that then? Why don't I go into training for schema, compassion, at psychodynamic. I could do it much more thoroughly than the doctorate, much more easily as well. I want to learn research. Okay, a bit more of a valid reason, in my view, than the learning different models of therapy. But again, could I not just do a master's? Could I not just get a job in research? Could I not do a PhD, for example, if I'm financially able to? Um, so it comes down to, well, what the final question to ask on this, which is, what does the clinical doctorate offer you that nothing else can? And when you imagine yourself as a clinical psychologist, what sort of psychologist do you want to be? What do you want to be able to do? And what skills do you want to be able to learn? And this is important because many first timers, myself included, tend to write the application focused on one aspect of clinical psychology. In my experience, it was clinical. But actually, think a little bit about the role of a clinical psychologist. They don't just do therapy. In fact, you could argue that if that's what you want to focus on, you're better off being a therapist. You can learn the models of therapy and how to be a therapist much more thoroughly, perhaps. So you've got to think about, well, what are the aspects of it that I need to check? And for me, that is clinical, research, leadership, service development. Those are the things. And four of those things I didn't learn on my high intensity CBT training, neither did I on my PWP training. And those are the things that I'm interested in learning in. Not just one of those things, but a combination of all of those things. And that was unique to me. And I won't go into any further details around that, but there were specific reasons which I wrote on my application as to why I want those. So ask yourself, what do you want to learn? Is it those other elements? And if so, why? What do you want to do with those things? And then this brings us up to the final question, which is other factors relating to your application. And there's so many different ways you can go about this. It's I don't know if there's a real right or wrong with it. The way I went about it was to clarify some shortcomings on my application. So as I mentioned, I don't have an undergrad. I do have an undergrad. I don't know what I'm saying. It's that bird. I don't have a academic postgrad. I have an undergrad only, and I got a low to mid 2-1. So and considering I'm up against people with firsts, masters, PhDs, courses want either high 2-1, some want a first. Are looking to prioritize people with a first and score higher based on that, and some even on A levels. So I used the opportunity on my application to clarify, from my point of view, why this was. Why didn't I get a higher 2-1? What did I focus on? Just to explain that actually me getting that grade isn't a reflection on my academic abilities. That's how I went about it. But for you, it might be different. It's all about how do you want to, what do you want to explain on the application? So that's all the questions around it. Now, bringing this all together, how do we go about it? Well, myself and a few people I've spoken to tend to approach the application in very similar ways. And not even just the application, but all forms of writing, be it essay writing, job applications. Myself specifically, I can get very fixated when I'm writing the application to make it the perfect application the first time. That means I'm writing with the word count in mind. I'm thinking of the perfect vocabulary, grammar, what I want to write, does it flow, what do I want to do? And something changed this year in that I approached it quite differently. I just wrote. I wrote my first draft out and I didn't consider anything regarding the word count, grammar, vocabulary. I just wrote. I got all my ideas out there. And this allowed me to actually just get a better grasp of the sort of things that mattered to me. And then I opened another Word document and I rewrote it and I rewrote it and rewrote it. I never got into the temptation of making small adjustments on the drafts. I just always made a new draft. And it sounds like that's going to be more time consuming, more stressful. It did to me anyway. But actually, I was less stressed because I wasn't sitting here I'm in an RN getting overwhelmed, like, oh, what's the perfect word I want to say? How do I want to end this paragraph? What's the point I'm trying to make? I just wrote, and I felt good that I was writing because I was getting something done. I was accomplishing something. And each time you rewrite it, you become more succinct. You get the points across. You start fine-tuning what it is you want to say on the application. And I'm going to come back to that point about what it is you want to say in a moment. But my first tip for approaching it is just write everything out. And then that in itself gets to the point of being able to be purely reflective. Because when you see some people's applications, some people have seen mine, I've seen some others. I think we assume that this was the first application they've made, it was their first draft and they've done it perfectly. How did they get to that point? And chances are they didn't. They wrote and wrote. I mean, anyone who sees mine, I can tell you now, anyone who's seen mine application or may see it, that it took me 16 drafts to write it. And it might be more for you, same, less, it doesn't matter. And actually, I started my application being very descriptive. But over time, as I kept rewriting, I started picking out themes of what I wanted to say. And so when you're writing things such as an assistant psychologist working in this, I did XYZ, what it comes back to that point of what do you want them to know? And that's the key thing to ask yourself as you're writing the drafts. What are the important themes here? Can you combine elements of the themes together? So for example, if I'm focusing on a clinical aspect of the application, that first question, so thinking about what I said earlier about the different roles of a clinical psychologist, clinical research, service development, and leadership. If I'm thinking about clinical, what am I trying to say here? Is it worth me saying, as a CBT therapist, I did this and learned this, as a PWP, I did this and learned this? Or can I just say, while formulating, this is what I've seen, this is what I learned, this is what I experienced? Am I just getting that same point across, but focusing on actually the important aspects, which is the reflective part? And that comes having written it down. So my first advice in approaching the application comes down to just write everything out. Don't think about the perfect way of saying it. Don't think about grammar, vocabulary, the word count. Just get all ideas on that paper and keep rewriting. The second part of the application, and my second tip for the application, sorry, it's that bird, is going back to what I said at the start, which is using the application as a whole. So I mentioned how people reading your application already know the things you've done from the experience section and how you can use that to your advantage. You've got to consider what are the specific parts of the application asking me. I.e., the first one's a reflective element, it's asking you to reflect on your experiences. The second one is about dissemination and publications. The third one is what you want to get from training. And the fourth one is any other factors that you think are relevant for them to know. As you're writing out your drafts, when you are thinking about those themes and what you want them to know, it's again asking where would that fit best? I.e., okay, so talking about the question of what you want to get out, there was an element where I focused in my earlier drafts on what I've taken from being a clinician and what I've observed and what this means I want to do. And initially that was in the first question. But as I was rewriting it, I came to that point of realizing that actually that would maybe fit best in the third question. So even if there are things that you can't fit in that first question, you don't have to. That first question, I think because it's the first big question, it's got the most word count, we can sometimes attribute the most importance to it. But actually the whole application is important. And if you can't fit it in that first bit, would it even fit better in the other questions, depending on what you're trying to get across? And I say that because I have sometimes seen applications where they try and squeeze things in that first thing where it could have been put in the dissemination section. And then ironically, within the dissemination section, there are things that I would have put in the first question. So if you are writing drafts, you'll have the clarity to do that. You'll start picking out themes. If you approach the application as a whole and you just focus on what you're trying to get across, it will come down, it will all fit into place. Then the next tip, people reading it. So not just with the declin, but mostly with the declin, but some applications, I sometimes come across these questions, and this question I've asked myself as well, which is, should I mention XYZ? And this might be things about personal things. So, for example, your experience of being a carer, disabilities, mental health. Should I mention those things? And how would that look to them? Now, I think when we're writing the application, we can get so focused on trying to think, what do the courses want to read? What do they want to know? But as I mentioned at the very start of the video, you don't know. We can only guess, but we don't know the people shortlisting the applications. We don't know the people on the panel, what they're thinking. So actually, don't come at this application thinking about what do they want to hear. Instead, focus on what do I want them to know about me. And so if you're thinking about, should I mention my experiences in therapy? If you want to, is my answer. If you want to, if there's an aspect of that you want them to know. So I mentioned very briefly that I've got experiences of accessing therapy, and I brought that into the third question about why and what I hope to gain from training. And I made it relevant because having it, what I reflected on was having been a therapist, but also received therapy. This is what I've observed, and so this is what I want to do. So as long as it fits within the application and you feel comfortable disclosing that, saying it, then that's absolutely fine. Because there is that other question, one I actually forgot about, which is funny. This is the first vid, so it's not going to be the best one. Um, which is, things about your interests and hobbies outside of psychology. And I've spoken to people, and I've even thought about it, what kind of interests and hobbies are going to sound great to them? What are they going to find fascinating? What's going to engage them? And I remember wanting to talk a little bit about, the fact that I like video games. And I remember someone a while ago said, "Oh, I don't know, video games, not the best hobby." And then I look back now and I'm thinking, why? Why is that not something worth mentioning if I enjoy it? You're asking me what I like to do. Well, I like to play video games. That's what they really want to see. They want to see that. Do you have a life outside of this career? Because this career does pull you in. What else do you do? What do you do to de-stress? How do you get out of this field? You can't just breathe and live psychology all the time. Trust me, I've tried it and it's not good. So be honest. You don't have to talk about all these interesting things you do, make it up. If you someone from the webinar the other week mentioned that they talked about how they like going to the pub. That's great. So if that, so be authentic. And in terms of going back to that initial tip of, do I say what, do I focus on what I think they want to know? No. Focus on what you want them to know about you. As long as your application is reflective, personable, answers the questions as we've outlined, you're fine. So then it comes down to people reading the application. And I've fallen into this trap before where I've been very tempted to show it to a number of people within this field, trainees, qualifieds, even colleagues. And the fact is, there's absolutely no way you're going to get someone to say, this is great. Or if they do, is it really authentic? And that's because the application is so personal. People reading it are going to have their own personal views on it. So there's always going to be someone who will tell you to mention this, include this. And my advice around that is feel free to take their advice if you want to. But the most important thing is, does this fit within your application? Does it match your tone, your themes, the things you want them to know about you? If not, then you don't have to add it. And it comes down to just advice that I see everywhere, which is valid, which is too many cooks in the kitchen. In that, don't get tempted to show it to too many people, because no matter what, people are going to have their opinions, and it's not always right, it's not always wrong. But what will happen is if you focus too much on trying to add everything people are telling you, it's no longer your application, and chances of getting shortlisted might be a lot harder because you lose that personable, reflective element that can only come from you. So when you are looking to people with advice, I'm buddying about 4 people at the moment on their applications, following that mentor scheme that I set up on the group. And what I've tried to make very clear to them is that I may have some advice and suggestions, but you don't have to take it. Actually, the things I'm going to try and focus more on is making sure this is what, making sure that I've understood the points they're trying to make, whether it can be written a bit more reflectively if there is a possibility, and how much more, try and pull out more reflections out of them. That's the thing to focus on. And so if you are getting someone to read your application, maybe ask them, does this sound like me? Does this sound like, do you get a sense of who I am, what I'm trying to get across from reading this? So those are some of the real important tips that I found have been really helpful for me, and hopefully yourselves if you try them out. And now it comes down to, when do I submit? And the fact is, there's no right or wrong. I submitted about a week before the deadline. And my rationale for this was I didn't mind spending the extra £10, but equally submitting it, not submitting it, my mind was still going to be focused on it. At least keeping the application, I felt somewhat in control of it. But at some point, I did have to let go and recognize and realize that there's always going to be something to change and reflect on. And weirdly enough, part of the buddying system I've got going on with the 4 people is going through the application with them, talking about what I've talked about today, but with my application as well for context. And it's funny that as we're going through it, I'm sitting there and I'm telling them as well, God, I would have changed this now. I would fix this. And oh my God, there was a big grammar mistake towards the end of the paragraph in the first question. And you know what? Didn't stop me getting shortlisted, didn't stop me getting a spot. So, it comes back to that idea of there's no such thing as perfection. It really is about good enough. And it's for you to find a balance of how much, do the pros of me working on this application outweigh the cons? And if it does, great, keep going, keep until you feel ready to submit. If not, and then maybe it is time to submit that as well. So in terms of the next thing, you've submitted your application. Now what? Well, it's that really awful way, and I can't stress how horrible the process is. And you'll see tips that I also advocate for, which is, try and focus on other things, keep away from the groups, social media. That's great. But I also think doing those things with the knowledge that it's not going to prevent you from thinking about it, stressing about it, being worried about it from time to time. It's a normal thing. And actually, I think it's more about accepting that those are going to happen, because you care. If you didn't care about getting a spot, then you wouldn't be anxious or stressed. You wouldn't apply for it. So be kind to yourselves about that, and just accept that from time to time, you're going to get really stressed about it. You're going to be thinking about it, but where possible, try your best to continue on with other aspects of your lives as well. Okay, so I can't think of anything else I wanted to mention. Other things might come up and I might do a second video. This isn't obviously, this video doesn't quite match the quality of some other videos out there. In all honesty, editing's not my thing. Neither is making a script beforehand. I've just got bullet points and I'm just kind of going from there, which is why things have come out the way they have. As I get a bit more into YouTube, I might start making it a little bit nicer. But I hope this video has been helpful. If you have found today's video really helpful, then I'd really appreciate a like. Feel free to subscribe as well. That really helps. Leave any comments, because it just helps, obviously, to know that whether or not to continue this. I'm hoping to make more videos on the declin, even thinking of doing like a little mini vlog on the first day of the declin for myself, and just any other things. But also, if you've got any advice or suggestions, feel free to leave it in the comments. And definitely, as you know, the channel is called Psychology Made Simple. So there'll be videos outside of the declin as well. I'm using. Let me try again. I'm doing this channel with a friend of mine, Catherine Taylor, a CBT therapist as well. So we'll also be doing live streams, podcasts. She'll be doing her own topics as well. But yeah, it would be great, if you like the video, like, subscribe, leave comments. I will read them, and I'll, if people have suggestions, I'll definitely try making videos and hopefully keep getting better at it. But best of luck with it all, guys. You've got this. Just try your best and just be you. Be your authentic self from start to finish, and you can't go wrong. Bye.